more than 4,000 years ago, while Egypt raised pyramids beside the Nile, and Mesopotamian kings carved their victories into stone, another civilization stretched silently across the plains of South Asia. It had no towering monuments glorifying rulers, no giant statues of gods, no records of conquering armies, and yet it became one of the largest and most sophisticated urban societies of the ancient world. Along the banks of the Indus River, immense cities emerged from dust and floodwater with astonishing precision. Streets formed perfect grids, sewage systems ran beneath homes, warehouses overflowed with grain, beads, copper, and pottery traded across enormous distances. For centuries, life moved with remarkable order and stability. But then, something changed. The collapse did not begin with fire or invasion, it began quietly. A river shifted, seasons became unpredictable, trade routes weakened, and before anyone understood the scale of what was unfolding, one of humanity's greatest civilizations was slowly disappearing into silence beneath the sand. At its height, the Indus Valley Civilization covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Thousands of settlements spread across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, connected through commerce, engineering, and a shared cultural identity that still remains partially undeciphered. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were unlike anything the ancient world had seen. Their streets were organized with mathematical consistency, lined with brick houses connected to drainage systems so advanced that many societies would not replicate them for thousands of years. Massive granaries suggested centralized food storage, while standardized weights revealed a civilization obsessed with order and precision. Yet strangely, there were no palaces dominating the skyline and no obvious evidence of kings ruling through terror. Daily life appeared disciplined, structured, and deeply interconnected. For generations, the system worked with extraordinary efficiency. But beneath the stability of the cities, invisible pressures were already beginning to accumulate. Every morning, merchants opened workshops filled with carved stones, ivory ornaments, and copper tools destined for distant lands. Farmers cultivated wheat, barley, peas, and cotton along fertile floodplains nourished by seasonal river cycles. Boats moved across waterways, carrying timber and goods toward trading partners in Mesopotamia, where merchants spoke of a distant land known as Meluha, believed to be the Indus realm. Children walked through narrow alleyways, shaded by mud brick walls, while water flowed through carefully engineered channels beneath their feet. Smoke rose from kilns producing pottery and standardized forms, almost identical, across settlements separated by hundreds of miles. There was rhythm in the civilization, a predictable cycle of agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade that bound millions of lives together. But civilizations built upon environmental balance survive only as long as nature remains predictable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the environment sustaining the Indus world began to transform in ways its people could neither control nor fully understand. At first, the warning signs were subtle enough to ignore. Floods arrived at unusual times. Some years brought devastating surges of water that swallowed crops and weakened foundations. Other years brought droughts that cracked the soil beneath farming communities. The great rivers that sustained entire cities no longer behaved consistently. Modern geological evidence suggests tectonic movements may have altered river paths, redirecting crucial water sources away from densely populated settlements. Among the most catastrophic changes was the gradual weakening of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, believed by many historians to be linked to the legendary Saraswati River, mentioned in ancient traditions. As water sources shifted or dried entirely, agricultural stability began to fracture. But no single disaster announced the beginning of collapse. The danger emerged through repetition. One failed harvest became several. One unstable flood season became decades of uncertainty. By the time the pattern became impossible to deny, the civilization was already entering a dangerous transition. Trade networks, once the lifeblood of the Indus economy, also began to weaken. For centuries, merchants from Mesopotamia had exchanged silver, textiles, and luxury goods for Indus products transported across deserts and seas. But ancient records from Mesopotamian cities slowly stopped mentioning the prosperous land of Meluha. Political instability elsewhere disrupted commercial routes, reducing the flow of resources that urban populations depended upon. Inside the Indus cities, Workshops that once operated continuously began producing less. Archaeologists would later discover signs of declining craftsmanship and reduced urban maintenance. Buildings repaired with lower quality materials hinted at growing shortages and weakening administration. The collapse did not arrive as a sudden catastrophe visible to everyone at once. It spread unevenly, quietly hollowing out the structures that kept the civilization unified. Some communities adapted temporarily. Others began to fragment. Yet most people likely believed the disruptions were temporary, convinced that the old stability would eventually return. As environmental pressures intensified, populations started abandoning the largest urban centers. The great cities that once symbolized organization and permanence slowly lost inhabitants. Streets that had once echoed with traders, carts, and craftsmen became quieter with every passing season. Wells dried deeper into the earth. Public infrastructure decayed without sufficient labor or coordination to maintain it. In Mohenjo-daro, layers of rebuilding suggest repeated flooding struck the city over generations, forcing survivors to reconstruct homes atop older ruins again and again. But eventually, even resilience has limits. Entire neighborhoods were left empty. Warehouses stood partially abandoned. The social systems that once coordinated urban life began unraveling under constant environmental and economic stress. But no dramatic final battle marked the end. No emperor watched the empire burn. The collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization happened through exhaustion, a slow retreat from complexity itself. For ordinary people, the consequences were devastating. Farmers migrated toward regions with more reliable rainfall. Families separated as communities relocated eastward into smaller rural settlements. Urban identity, once tied to enormous interconnected cities, gradually dissolved into localized survival. Generations born inside carefully planned streets suddenly found themselves living in scattered villages without the same infrastructure or trade connections their ancestors once depended on. Disease may also have spread more easily, as floods contaminated water supplies and weakened nutrition made populations more vulnerable. Some evidence suggests social violence increased in certain areas during the later phases of decline, though not on the scale once imagined by older invasion theories. Fear did not necessarily arrive through war. It arrived through instability, through uncertainty about harvests, rivers, and the future. And perhaps most terrifying of all was the realization that the systems people trusted for centuries could no longer protect them. For decades, historians believed the civilization had been destroyed by invading armies known as the Aryans, who supposedly swept into the region and annihilated the cities through violence. But modern archaeology has challenged much of that theory. The evidence for massive warfare or widespread destruction remains surprisingly weak. Skeletons discovered in ancient streets were once interpreted as massacre victims. Yet later analysis suggested more complex explanations. Instead of one dramatic invasion, the collapse now appears tied to environmental change, economic decline, and gradual societal fragmentation. This transformed the story entirely. The Indus civilization was not necessarily conquered by enemies from outside. It may have been overwhelmed by pressures emerging from within its own fragile dependence on climate stability and interconnected systems. The silence of its disappearance became even more haunting because there was no single moment historians could point to as the end. The civilization simply faded, city by city, generation by generation. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the Indus Valley Civilization remains its writing system. Thousands of seals containing symbols and inscriptions have been discovered across ancient sites, yet no scholar has definitively deciphered them. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, whose histories survive through readable records, the voices of the Indus people remain trapped behind undecoded symbols carved into stone and clay. Their rulers, beliefs, fears, and final struggles are largely unknown. Archaeologists reconstruct their lives through fragments, broken pottery, abandoned streets, drainage systems buried beneath layers of sediment. This silence changes the emotional weight of the collapse. Entire generations experienced environmental crisis, migration, and uncertainty, without leaving behind narratives explaining what they felt. No surviving chronicle describes the final years of the cities. No text warns future civilizations about what went wrong. All that remains are ruins slowly reclaimed by Earth, and centuries of unanswered questions buried beneath them. Long after the urban centers disappeared, cultural elements of the Indus world survived in transformed ways. Agricultural practices, craft traditions, and settlement patterns continued evolving across South Asia. The civilization itself did not vanish completely. Instead, it fragmented and dispersed into new forms. People adapted to changing climates and migrated toward regions where survival remained possible. Yet the loss of urban complexity marked a profound rupture in human history. Monumental cities that had once demonstrated extraordinary coordination became abandoned landscapes, exposed to wind and erosion. Trade systems collapsed, standardized production faded, social organization localized into smaller communities, with fewer connections to distant regions. Human civilization had advanced dramatically inside the Indus Valley, but advancement alone could not guarantee permanence. The environment sustaining that complexity had shifted faster than the society could adapt. And once the interconnected systems began failing, recovery became increasingly impossible. Centuries passed before the ruins of the Indus cities emerged again from beneath layers of dust and forgotten history. Local communities used ancient bricks from abandoned sites to build railways during the 19th century, unaware they were dismantling one of the oldest urban civilizations on Earth. When archaeologists finally uncovered the vast remains of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the discovery shocked historians across the world. Entire streets, wells, workshops, and drainage systems revealed a level of sophistication that forced scholars to rethink the origins of urban civilization. But the ruins also exposed something darker. Even the most organized societies can disappear so gradually that later generations forget they ever existed. The people of the Indus Valley likely believed their cities would endure indefinitely, just as every civilization believes its systems are stable enough to survive the future. The collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization still echoes today because its downfall feels disturbingly modern. Climate instability, disrupted trade networks, migration pressures, resource scarcity, and fragile urban dependence remain defining challenges of contemporary civilization. The ancient people living beside the Indus River could not see the full scale of the transformation unfolding around them. Each disruption appeared manageable in isolation. A failed harvest could be survived, a weakened trade route could be adjusted, a shifting river might still return. But collapse is rarely caused by one event alone. It emerges when multiple pressures accumulate faster than societies can adapt. And by the time the signs become undeniable, systems once considered permanent may already be unraveling beyond repair. The ruins buried beneath the plains of South Asia are not simply remnants of a lost world. They are reminders that civilizations often disappear quietly, not in one final catastrophe, but through slow erosion of the structures holding human order together. Today the streets of Mohenjo-daro stand silent beneath the burning sun, their bricks weathered by thousands of years of wind, heat, and forgotten memory. No crowds fill the marketplaces anymore, no merchants unload cargo beside the river banks. The drains that once carried water through one of humanity's most advanced cities now sit dry beneath open skies. Yet the silence itself tells a story. It speaks of a civilization that mastered urban planning, trade, engineering, and social organization long before much of the world understood such complexity. And still, it could not escape the forces slowly reshaping its environment and weakening its foundations. The end of the Indus Valley Civilization was not a single night of destruction. It was a long farewell stretched across generations. A civilization built with astonishing precision slowly dissolved into uncertainty, until only ruins remained. Silent evidence that even the greatest systems humanity creates can one day fade back into dust.